So this is Dan of Vagabond Awake, and I have Alex here today. And many of you may remember about 6 months ago, I bought the first health insurance I've had in 17 years living overseas because a bunch of expats were telling me about Alex. And I read his ebook. I kind of read his book like a consumer book. It taught me what to look for in a good policy and a bad policy. By the way, that book's available if you're going to be shopping for health insurance. Click the link below this video, get the ebook. And because Alex will be talking about the good wording, he calls it, and a policy he just paid. But the nightmare for Alex is having somebody try to make a claim soon after buying a policy. But luckily, luckily he had the right wording in the policy, and that makes all the difference in the world. Alex, I'll quit mumbling. Welcome again to say hello to my audience.
Yes, thank you everybody for your response to that first video. I'm very I have nothing but gratitude for that. One of my nightmares as a broker is to have a claim right after the inception date, right after the start date, where it's not an accident, emergency, or trauma. In other words, some disease pops up which results in a claim, and I don't want to disappoint anybody. I want people I want their claims to be paid. I don't want them to be unhappy. I don't want them to have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars because the insurance company denied their claim. And of course, they're going to hate me, and they're going to hate you maybe because they got the link from you. So this situation was a fellow who joined on December 15th, and he had a heart attack in Chiang Mai. And I'm thinking, oh my God, why couldn't this have happened like 1 year later, 2 years later? Why, God, why does it have to happen to me? And Dan's going to hate me. And so I thought, but hang on a second. I only sell policies with good policy wording on pre-existing conditions. So maybe this situation can be saved, or maybe it's not going to be a drama at all. So this fellow called me, and he said he was in hospital for 4 or 5 days, and he'd had the heart attack, and he was wondering what's going to happen next because it's so close to his start date. And I was wondering myself, how the insurer was going to deal with this. We went through the process, but then there was a stumbling block. And the stumbling block was this fellow had been a slow-moving traveler, maybe a follower of yours, for at least 4 years. And he left Canada in 2020 before COVID. And that was the last time he really saw a doctor, which did an annual physical for him. Now, he did get a letter from that doctor, and that was sent to the insurer saying, well, in 2020, he was perfectly healthy and fit and had no cardiac issues at all. But then, because of the gap in any medical advice, the gap in, somebody should, I suppose, prudently have a medical exam once a year. He didn't do this. And maybe that was a problem during COVID, because he was trapped somewhere for a long time during COVID. So the impasse was that he'd made this claim like 6 weeks or less within the start date of his policy. And he had actually seen a dermatologist in 2022 because he had a suspicious spot on his back, and he had that removed. So that was the last time he saw a doctor. And so the claim was paid. Ta-da! So let's talk about why they paid the claim and why an insurer wouldn't pay the claim. Now, in our first interview, I talked about policy wording being on pre-existing conditions being the most important thing to look at in any prospective insurance policy, health insurance policy you're considering purchasing. And in my book, I classify policy wordings on pre-existing conditions in 3 ways: good, bad, and ugly. So all policy wordings have wording to the effect that pre-existing conditions are excluded. You have to buy the car insurance before you have the car accident. Makes sense. But the key thing in good policy wording after the bit which says pre-existing conditions are excluded is what I call the qualifying phrase. And it goes this way: except those conditions which you could not have been reasonably aware of. So the whole thing, pre-existing conditions are excluded except those conditions which you could not have been reasonably aware of. So bad policy wording has only the bit where it says pre-existing conditions are excluded with no qualifying phrase. Ugly policy wording has the exclusion bit, and they have what I call the disqualifying phrase, which says even those you don't know about are excluded. I only offer policies with good policy wording, it turns out, for good reason, because this fellow's claim was paid. But this raises another interesting point, especially for people our age. I'm 66, you're 62. You really ought to have an annual physical once a year. And so if you do buy a health insurance policy, you should, what I do is I advise all my clients to have that policy and to get a letter from that doctor, hopefully on letterhead, saying, I have examined Dan such and such a date, he's this height, he's this weight, this is his blood pressure, he presents as a normal 62-year-old, and he's taking no medications, and he has no infirmities. So what people do is they get that letter and they send it to me, and I put it on file with the insurer. So in the case of this fellow in Chiang Mai, this would have made the claim go a lot better, but it was so close to his inception date that he hadn't gotten around to having the physical.
And they paid it anyway, so
They
congratulations.
paid it in. So
Yeah.
I had all sorts of bad scenarios going through my head. Oh, Dan's gonna hate me because he's gonna hear about this. But good news, it's a good story, I think.
Yeah, they paid. That's amazing. We all have this fear that we're going to buy some policy and something's going to happen too soon after it starts. And it's just nice to hear, a positive ending. So that's great. And thanks for letting me know.
But one other thing I'd like to mention in my book, I talk about onus and burden of proof. Right. So if you have bad policy wording or ugly policy wording on pre-existing conditions, the onus and the burden of proof is for you to prove that your claim wasn't a pre-existing condition. Whereas if you have the good qualifying phrase and the good wording, the onus and the burden of proof is reversed. It's on the insurer to prove that it wasn't, or that it was a pre-existing condition. And if they can't do that, they're going to pay the claim.
Right, right.
It makes a huge difference.
That is a huge difference, yeah. That's great. Burden of proof is everything. The insurance company can't prove that you knew it.
If they can't prove you're lying, you still win.
Yeah. Yeah. But not that we're encouraging anybody to lie. It's just nice to know if you don't know it, that they're going to pay. That's great.
Exactly right.
So I just wanted to let my audience know that Alex is someone who was referred to me by expats because they like working with him and they feel he's honest, and because he only works with these kind of policies that have the proper wording. And that's all in the ebook. It's all in the previous video. I'll put a link to that below if you want more details about everything. But I just want people to know that I'm not going to be paid anything if you buy a policy from Alex. I do this because people follow me and I want them to have a smooth and easy life. It's not for my benefit. In fact, I bought this policy myself. So I believe in the product and I believe in Alex from my personal experience and from references from other people. One of the things you mentioned in the previous video that I thought was fascinating and I'd never heard of was this UK, I believe you call it ombudsman. Tell us how that works. What's that about?
I like UK policies for the following three reasons. It's the best legal domicile for this type of product because they don't discriminate against non-residents. In other words, you have equal rights. Many US policies are located in states, typically Indiana or Florida, because they have a special classification of policy called typically a surplus lines policy, where your rights are not equal to residents of that state. They're insuring travelers or expat health. They're selling expat health to people, expat health insurance to people. And you don't have the same rights as people in that state. In other words, the people in that state that buy insurance, if the insurance company does them wrong, they can go to the state regulator. You can't do that because it's the surplus lines policy. So you don't have equal rights. In the UK, you actually have equal rights. The UK Insurance Ombudsman, the regulator there is called the Financial Conduct Authority, which is very interesting. So a few years ago, they had a bit of a scandal in the UK investment services space, and consumers were burned. And the regulator at the time was called the Financial Services Authority. They cleaned up that mess and consumers were compensated. But in doing this process, they felt that they wanted to change their focus. And so they changed the name to the Financial Conduct Authority because they want good conduct to be the watchword of all players in the UK financial services space. And really, they don't tolerate bad policy wording. And you do have this consumer watchdog called the UK Insurance Ombudsman's Office, a government watchdog, a government agency, to which you can bring any claim dispute. They will examine it for free. You have to jump through some hoops to get to that stage, but if they think the policyholder is in the right, they will order the insurer to pay the claim. Nobody else, no other domicile, certainly in any U.S. state, has this kind of consumer protection. And the good news is, for those three tick boxes, you don't have to pay more for those good things.
I think it's less, in my opinion. I shopped around a little bit before buying your policy, and yours was a low. Yours, not only was your wording right, and you know, and I learned about it via your ebook, but your prices were lower. So so you don't pay more, you pay less for that. At least I did. I don't know, you know, maybe because of my physical conditions or whatever. The policy was better than it would be for someone who has, you know, other problems or conditions, but it was lower for me.
Well, there's another thing about the UK policies, which, since we're talking about that domicile as advantages, in my book I talk about three methods of intake underwriting. I talk about short form, and then full medical underwriting, and then what's called moratorium. Moratorium is unique to British policies. So for all Americans, certainly, and almost everybody, they would only be familiar with full medical underwriting as an application type. It's where you list, I have an exhaustive list of questions. You disclose your whole medical history in the application form, and you send that to the insurer. So, and pre-existing conditions, well, if you have them, you will be either rejected completely, they will put a load on your premium, or they will put an exclusion on the policy. So moratorium is a different animal, and they have a short list of questions. And so what happens is, if you had a pre-existing condition, depending on what it was, you may not have to disclose what it was because it's a short list of questions. And the way it works is, on the pre-existing condition, depending on what it was, if you can go through 2 clear years, this is the moratorium wait period on pre-existing conditions. If you can go through and they go back typically, depending on the policy, either 2 years or 5 years. Any pre-existing condition you had or knew about in the last 2 or 5 years, or were symptomatic for, or were taking medication for, or were diagnosed for, is not covered in the first 2 years of the policy. So long as you did not have another symptom, under recurrence, a diagnosis, take medication for that pre-existing condition, providing you had 2 clear years, they will treat it after the second policy year and the third year as if it was a new condition. So this is really great for people that had cancer, you know, 5 or 6 years ago. After the second policy year on a moratorium policy, any recurrence of cancer will be treated as if it was new, that you'd never had it before.
That's great. And I think people should realize something about you, Alex, that they may not know. Certainly if they didn't see the first video, and that's that you're an expat, aren't you?
True. I've been an expat for 30 years. 7 years in Japan, 5 years in China, in Thailand, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Philippines. Then I bought a yacht and went sailing for 8 years. I visited every island in the Caribbean, tried to swim in every waterfall, and I was 22 different countries. Then I came to this island, Hispaniola, and a big storm came up to put me on the beach. 10 years later, when I recently regained consciousness, I woke up a happy man with 2 more children. So that's my story.
Well, Alex, you know, it's great. Thanks so much for letting me know about this event. And I think it's important that, you know, this sort of thing, we all have this fear that we're going to make a claim soon after a policy starts and it won't get paid. And so I'm very happy. Of course, I don't know who it is. And you've, of course, protecting the person's privacy. But
he might call you, by the way, but I'm encouraging him to do so.
Oh, okay. I'm just happy that he got his illness covered. Now, was it a cardiac arrest, or again, we don't?
He had a heart attack. He had a drama, and it was a heart attack. If this had been any American policy with what I call bad or ugly policy wording, they would have said, well, you know, this occlusion of his coronary artery did not happen in 6 weeks. This happened over a long period of time. So it's definitely a pre-existing condition. Therefore, we're not paying, you know, whether he knew about it or not. The ugly ones definitely would not pay it. The bad ones, I don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt in a contract like this, because why should I, when there's good policy wording, which the benefit of the doubt is automatically given to the policyholder.
Thanks so much, Alex.
We salute you, sir.
You're a silly man. Have a great day.
Bye.
Take care. To get Alex's contact information and a free copy of his ebook, click the first link in the notes below this YouTube video.